When discussing games, I often hear Eco and Shadow of the Colossus praised as some of the best games ever made. I just don't agree. I don't think Eco is bad, but I don't think it's God's gift to gaming as everyone claims. I'm playing the HD version on PS3. If there were changes from the original PS2 to PS3 HD version, then I'm not aware of them. Also, you can probably take a wild guess at what the next episode is going to be. I'm going to do my best to hold back my use of the word pretentious in either of these reviews. Eco is minimalistic, so honestly I just don't have a lot to say about it. Eco is built entirely around what I think is commonly considered one of the single worst aspect of games: escort missions. Yorda effectively acts as a key to open the various locked doors you'll encounter. Eco is based around figuring out ways to get Yorda to the locked door in any particular area to move on to the next one. It works for a while, but eventually feels tedious because of how worthless she is. Eco can easily reach most of these doors on his own, then you usually have to do some convoluted thing to get Yorda to the end. Eco's combat is worthless. You can't die, as you don't have a health bar. You lose by having the enemies knock you over and drag Yorda to one of their shadow hole spawn points and presumably take her away. I honestly don't know what happens if you're not fast enough and Yorda gets sucked away because I never had it happen. I died in Eco, but it was exclusively to platforming deaths. The combat isn't good or fun. There's very little risk because you can't die from enemies. You have such a huge amount of time to pull Yorda back if she's taken to one of the shadow holes that there's no sense of urgency. At the end of the game, you return to the beginning and fight a lot of the shadows. There's no risk or tension because you just can't die and you don't have Yorda, so she can't be taken away. It goes along with a lot of the minimalistic ideas in Eco, and it's kind of a story thing when you reach that part, but it's not good from a gameplay standpoint. There is one part where you're separated from Yorda and enemies spawn. That feels a little intense because you need to get back to Yorda essentially on a timer and you're very far away. That's one of the only intense sections of Eco, and the only one I can remember off the top of my head. I think Eco would have been significantly better without combat at all. The one thing I respect Eco for is its use of restraint. There's very little dialogue and very little story present, and it still succeeds in being a good experience. It has an excellent sense of scale. The architecture is simple and large, and it makes it feel like you're really going on a big adventure through this abandoned castle. Graphics are debatable. As an HD remaster, it looks pretty good. It doesn't have the problems that a lot of other HD remasters like the Silent Hill collection had, where it just looked awful. Eco's simple, and it has a very simple aesthetic to go along with that, and I think it works. Sound is very minimal as well. It's very soft and ambient, and definitely not pushed to the forefront. I actually really like some of the music. I like the title tune. I guess it's track 16, You Were There, and the save music, which is apparently track 8, Heal. Otherwise, it's mostly just ambient noise rather than music playing. Things like water flowing or birds chirping, which makes the game feel very isolated, which works very nicely with the aesthetic they presented. There are a few puzzles that I would consider a bit obtuse. Early on, you need to break a bridge and you require bombs to do so. The bombs are actually in the area beside the one you need them. It actually looks like there are bombs in that area, but they're just like pots. So you need to exit the area, grab a bomb, and bring it back to the other area, which is just kind of threw me for a loop the first time because I didn't know you had to do that, and I don't think you ever really need to do that again in the game. There are two parts in Eco that are incredibly frustrating, and they're condensed into one section. There's a part where you have to jump on what's essentially a giant stone piston to launch Eco above to the next level. The timing to jump is way harder than it needed to be. It was frustrating to say the least. I did actually look up a guide on how to figure it out. I don't know about other versions, but I was reading that the piston may be gone from some versions of the game, but I don't know if that's true. The other is the water wheel. It is incredibly difficult to get the timing correct, which leads you to repeating it until you get a good attempt, just like the piston. I actually found out about the secret mace while reading the guide on how to get past those two problem areas, so I went ahead and got it. I don't think that really matters. Eco's combat is not its strong point, and it's not particularly difficult. I view the spiked mace as more of a convenience thing since it speeds up the flow of the game, since you usually fight way too many shadows and the stick you have is just terrible. Like I said, the part with the water wheel and the piston is kind of condensed into one part, and it's basically one of the worst, most poorly designed parts of the game. After you lose Yorda and go back to the castle, you have some pretty annoying segments. It's pretty easy to miss a jump and die, and you're sent quite far back. The finale versus the queen is also quite annoying. It's essentially a scripted sequence where you have to hide behind pillars, retrieve the sword, then run back and hit her and repeat, I think, 3 times. It was more frustrating than fun. I know I said it in Space Marine, but if combat is designed around doing a specific thing, then you have to do something else with it. The encounters feel more like gimmicks and usually aren't interesting or fun. Made worse is that the queen has a one-hit kill attack that makes you restart it all from the beginning, which just that extra little bit of annoyance. Eco's pretty short at just under 5.5 hours. The pacing is kinda off. Some sections are very short and easy, while others are rather long and drawn out. You also backtrack quite a bit. Your goals are basically to escape the castle by unlocking the door in the courtyard by doing puzzles and towers on either side of it. It takes a long time to get to either of those towers to actually unlock the door, since you have to go the long way around every time. The castle has a great sense of scale, but at the same time you're frequently revisiting areas, which makes it less enjoyable. I think if Eco was any longer, it would be a lot worse than it is. So I think it's good that it kind of teetered towards the short side. A group of soldiers bring Eco to a castle because he's cursed and he has horns. He's left imprisoned as a sacrifice. Due to sheer dumb luck, an earthquake knocks over his stone sarcophagus and he escapes. Eco wanders around and eventually comes across a girl trapped in a birdcage. Eco frees the girl and they work together to escape the castle, since she has the ability to open many of the locked doors. As they approach the gate, they're confronted by the queen, who turns on the defenses, preventing Eco and Yorda from escaping. Eco and Yorda work towards turning off the defenses and eventually return to the now opened gate. Eco proceeds to walk towards the bridge, but the queen comes and causes it to collapse. Eco falls and Yorda is taken by the queen. By some miracle, Eco survives the fall and climbs his way back up to the castle. Eco finds the sword his captors used to enter the castle and unlock the various doors. Eco finds Yorda, who has been turned to stone and is attacked by numerous shadows. After the battle, Eco confronts the queen, who reveals she's going to take over Yorda's body to live forever. Eco defeats the queen, but his horns are broken off and he's knocked unconscious. The castle begins to crumble, and Yorda turns into a shadowy monster. Yorda carries Eco outside, puts him in a boat, and sends him adrift. Eco wakes up on a beach and finds a human girl that looks exactly like Yorda. Then the game's over. It's minimal and basic for the most part. There are some interesting nuances. The most interesting part to me was at the very end when you find that the shadows were other sacrificed children. That was kind of a cool revelation, and it's a loose tie to the events of Shadow of the Colossus. You're supposed to watch the relationship between Yorda and Eco develop naturally throughout the course of the game. I think that does and doesn't work. Obviously, Eco and Yorda are experiencing everything that's happening together, and there is that dynamic of a mutually beneficial relationship present. Yorda can get you through doors Eco can't get through, and Eco's agility lets him make paths for Yorda to traverse that she wouldn't be able to get to herself. The problem is, since Yorda is effectively worthless as anything but a key, it made me resent her a little bit. She didn't do anything except open some doors, and I did all the legwork. It makes it difficult to get that attachment. Eco largely feels like a game about babysitting. Enslaved Odyssey to the West at least had Trip doing things which made her feel somewhat useful, even if that is very bare bones as well. The idea of no dialogue works and doesn't, again. It's minimalistic, but if you want to actually have some kind of deep character development and interaction, it's hard to do it without dialogue. It comes off as pretentious rather than a good design decision at times. Otherwise, it's bare bones. It's front and rear loaded. There's very little for the majority of the game, which makes the ending feel a bit like an exposition dump, even though it's still fairly minimal. Honestly, Eco's pretty boring. I know that I'd appreciate it more playing it now than if I was playing it at release and I was in high school. I think the minimalism is worth noting and definitely atypical in a lot of games. It's just not that interesting. The combat is boring and non-threatening. The puzzles are quite easy, with a few of them being very frustrating with the precise timings you need, or require a lot of running around to do something really basic. Some of the areas are nice to look at, like the windmill, but overall, it's pretty dull. I think Eco being short is really good, because if it was a 15-16 hour game, it would just be the worst. I think Eco would have been a lot more enjoyable if it just didn't have any combat at all. The combat sucks, and it's incredibly non-threatening. There's very little intensity in any situation where the game throws enemies at you. If the game completely removed it, I don't even think it would have detracted from the experience at all. If you wanted to have intensity, you could have situations where Yorda ended up in precarious situations and you had to save her. You didn't necessarily need enemies, and I think, honestly, the game would have been more noteworthy if there was no combat, which seems crazy to say, because I like action, but I think the game would have worked better with just no combat at all. So going along with that no combat idea, it'd be nice if there was more of a dynamic between Yorda and Eco. Maybe you have Yorda able to use some of her powers to activate or stop machinery, like the water wheel or the piston. It's kind of hard to think of what I would have Yorda do specifically, but basically I'd like to have Yorda help Eco in some way other than just being a key to the door to the next area. I think that would make Yorda more of a significant part of the game and the story. If she was doing anything to actively help you out through the course of the journey besides being a key, it would let you get more attached to her. I would really say that Eco is absolutely an overrated game. If we're going by the arbitrary 1 to 10, I'd say Eco is a 5 or 6. The combat is weak, the puzzles are not terribly unique or interesting, and there are a lot of sections that can be quite frustrating to get through. Most of the mechanics in general are nothing new, and they're done a lot better by other games. But I also think it's worth playing. It's a fairly unique experience. I think it's an excellent example of minimalism and restraint, which a lot of games just seem to miss out on. Unfortunately, I think that's one of the only things that it does really well. It's worth playing because if you discuss games a lot, eco is going to come up at some capacity, especially with The Last Guardian on the way after nearly like 10 years. While it's not what I would consider culturally significant, I think it's important to play games that people rave about as the best thing ever to form your own opinions on them, even if those opinions are going to be called contrarian or induce some animosity. My opinions on eco maybe not so much, but this will absolutely apply to the next game I'm going to talk about, because my opinions are contrarian and will induce some feelings of animosity.